Welcome to Jonas Plays Your Game, the series where I play your indie games and try to give you feedback. The purpose of this video is to learn from each other and to help you make better games. The genius little game we're gonna learn from today is called Aldarix the Battlemage. It's fairly simple, and if you want to play it, it's available for free on itch.io. Before we dive any deeper into the feedback section of this video though, let's discuss how this game is played and how it works. It feels a bit like an old school roguelike. It also feels a bit like desktop dungeons. It's turn-based, meaning every time you move, the enemies move as well. When you move into an enemy, you deal damage to the enemy. When an enemy moves into you, it deals damage to you. Very simple combat system, very easy to understand. But to make things a little more interesting, you also have a ton of spells. Because you're Aldarix, the badass battle mage after all. You can shoot the fireballs, tornadoes, laser balls, laser beams. You can teleport, you can do all kinds of shenanigans. And you also unlock more spells as you play. Let's review this game now. Let's have a look what this indie game does really well, so you can learn for your own game projects. First thing I've gotta say is, damn. The spells have really good balancing. For the most part, they cost very little mana, so you can use them quite frequently, which is really beneficial in a game about a battle mage and casting spells. But what really impressed me is that all of the spells really feel kind of equally useful. That's quite difficult to pull off, so before I tell you how it's done in this game, I wanna ask you, if you had to come up with 15 spells that are all equally useful, how would you do it? I think the solution is to make them situational, meaning every spell is good in a different situation and the player just has to figure out which one is the best one for the current situation. In this case, the fireball is only good against large group of enemies because it deals splash damage. The laser beam is good against undead, and this entanglement spell here cannot be used against flying enemies, so it's only good against units that are on the ground. The tricky part is not making it too obvious which spell is the best one for every situation. If there's a certain spell that is just good for opening doors and every time you see a door you know, I need to use this and this spell to open it, that makes it too easy to figure out which spell to use. But in this case, it's a very fine balance and you need to think which spell is the best one for every situation. Good job on that. Then the next thing I really liked is that there are very few enemies early on. There are only goblins, skeletons, and that's basically it. Those little devils come into the game a little later on as well. Usually you'd probably say the more enemies, the better, because that brings more variety into the game, but this time around, I think it's absolutely the correct decision because it makes the game way easier to understand. It makes it a lot more predictable. You know how those enemies behave, you know how you can interact with them. And there's still a lot of different ways you can interact with the enemies because you have so many different spells. And also the enemy types feel very, very different. They all act in a different way, have different amounts of HP, different strengths and weaknesses. And that just gives me that easy to learn, difficult to master sensation. Obviously new enemy types are introduced as the game progresses and you really have time to get used to all of the little quirks every enemy has. I really like the fact that the complexity is coming from the spells and not from the enemies. Good job on that. Before we move on to the negatives, there are 3 more things that I want to mention. Firstly, I really like that there's new content every now and then. You get new spells, new enemies. Very good pacing on that. And secondly, the levels are randomly generated, or at least semi-randomly generated, because enemies and potions always spawn in different positions, so even if you lose, you don't need to play the same thing over again. It adds a lot of replayability and makes it more interesting to replay a level. The level stays the same though, so I think that's a very interesting compromise between randomly generated and handcrafted. Really like that. And you can change the animation speed. If the animation speeds are too slow, you can speed them up, which in a game like this is pretty sweet. So all of the game devs that are watching this video, please let players customize the experience as much as possible, or at the very least as long as that doesn't mess with the experience you want them to have. Great, now let's give this indie game some feedback on what isn't working and what needs to change in my opinion. I think there's a lot to learn for your games as well, so let's dive right into that. Let's start with the look of the game. It's a very I think when you're in-game it actually works quite alright, but when you see a screenshot of it online, you're just like, do I really want to play this? Know what I mean? It doesn't look very appealing. And I feel like a lot of players will be turned off by that, because it doesn't stand out, it doesn't look special, and also aesthetically there might be some work to do. Not sure if you agree on this, but actually if you want to help this game developer out, just leave your feedback in the comments. Would you play this if you saw a screenshot online? Wouldn't you play this? And if no, why? And how could we fix it? Honestly, I'm not really an expert on art. Not sure if I can give any qualified feedback on that. I think improving the color palette a bit would definitely help a lot. Make the color grading a little more interesting. And also maybe make the dungeons a little more interesting. It's just a gray default dungeon. Watch my butt design method video if you need ideas how to mix it up a bit. If you judge this game based on its game mechanics, it's a really good game. But unfortunately, people can't judge your game based on the game mechanics. When they find your game online, they'll just have a look at the look and decide if they want to play. That's why the look is so important. And honestly, I struggle with that a lot as well in my games. Ovus Nova, Will You Snail. Nailing the look of your game to attract players is a really tough thing to do. But standing out is definitely step number 1. Next up. There are too many spells right from the get-go. That's just too overwhelming, you have to read too many different spells. Just let the player start off with fewer spells, maybe 2 or 3, that's totally enough, and then introduce the other spells relatively quickly so you get a sense of quick progression. It would feel more like growing and becoming a more and more powerful magician, and on top of that, the complexity would be a little more handleable for beginners. You could just get a new spell every level, and that would also make you curious to, oh my god, I wonder what spell I'm gonna get next. So I think there are pretty much only advantages for reducing the amount of spells you have at the beginning and unlocking them as you go. Another thing that I would definitely do is show the players the locked spells. Little lock icons that just show there will be another spell here. You can unlock this spell. Because that tells the player there will be more. You'll want to keep going. This black space right here serves absolutely no purpose at all. Putting a couple of locked icons there would be a lot better. Then another huge thing that doesn't work so well in this indie game so far is the feedback. You really need to give your players more feedback on what's going on. When a skeleton attacks you, it barely moves a couple of pixels. It's really hard to see. I'd really just give way better feedback for dealing damage, for taking damage, maybe make some hearts pop up and make them explode, or some numbers pop up, improve the animations, make them a little more noticeable and impactful. Do something. There needs to be more feedback. And I'll grant you that the feedback on most of the spells is pretty damn good. They are very awesome, clear and visible effects, but then others don't. For example, the lifesteal or the mana regeneration. Just putting a little icon on the side here, I mean, it's okay, but it's not brilliant. It would be a lot nicer to see something on the board, maybe make the player character glow or sparkle, or try to show it in the actual game instead of in the user interface, if that's possible. Then one thing I'd really like to see in the user interface though is the mana cost of the spells. That's really crucial information at the moment. You have to click on the spells in order to see how much mana they cost. I think you should be absolutely able to see that without clicking on something. If you don't want to use numbers, maybe just make little dots on the icons. 1 dot means 1 mana, 2 dots, 2 mana, 3 dots, 3 mana. Or maybe arrange the buttons in a way that explains how much mana they cost. Maybe you can have all the 1 mana spells together, all the 2 mana spells together. If you want to make this game a little more beginner friendly, which I think you should, dear creator of this game, make the mana costs more visible. Then here are a couple more things I would change. Firstly, some of the levels felt a little samey in the campaign. For example, this room and this room look almost identical, and there's really no good reason for that. It would also be nice if the look of the levels would change up a little, had a little more variety visually speaking, because that would also give you a bigger sense of progression and make you curious to see the next level. I've only played about an hour so far, but what I can tell about the campaign is it doesn't feel like a journey. It really just feels like a sequence of levels, and adding some sort of visual progression through the levels, adding some sort of gameplay level design progression through the levels would really help. For example, in one dungeon level there could be some beautiful crystals on the walls here and there, and then before you know it, when you get into the next level, it's all crystals all around the walls. I think that kind of progression makes the world feel a lot more coherent and makes it feel a lot more like an actual progression, like a journey through a real and interesting environment. You can do the same thing with the gameplay, by the way. For example, in one level, the corridors could start getting smaller and smaller, and then, ta-da, before you know it, in the next level, they're really slim and narrow. Then in the next level, they open up a little bit again, and then in the next level, it gets really wide and open. So all of those visual and gameplay quirks you can apply to your levels are really like story arcs. In one level, they start fading in, they get higher and higher, and then a couple of levels later, they fade out again. By the way, for all of you at home, you can send me your games as well to JonasPlaysYourGames@gmail.com. If you want to get some feedback for your indie games, a little review, just send me your games. They don't even need to be finished. You can also send me a prototype. Just ask some interesting questions so we have something to talk about and something to discuss. If you liked the video, hit the like button. If you want to see more of this, check out the Jonas Plays Your Games playlist. Yes, I know, wowie, there's a full playlist, go check that out. I hope there's a lot of value to be had for you. I mean, ultimately that's what this channel is supposed to be about, providing value to other game devs. Hopefully helping everybody to make better games. That's my mission. Peace out.